Hello and welcome to the MedSet free webinar series on how to get into core surgical training. My name is Francis Ugu. I'm one of the academic directors at MedSet, and we're joined today by Mr. Leo Gundel, who's going to take us through this series about core surgical training, what you need to do to earn a place in what is a very competitive training program. So this session will be recorded and you will have access to it after the session. There's also some links further down in the presentation about additional resources that you can use in order to help yourself get the training job that you want, and also to enhance your portfolio accordingly. So with all of that said, I will hand you over to Leo.
Cool. Thanks, Francis, and thank you for using my Mr. title as I passed MRCS recently. The novelty hasn't worn off of going back to Mr., so that's great. Cool. So thanks for joining, everybody. The background is my name is Leo Gundel, and we're going to go through this is the part one of the CST series, and we're going to address the portfolio to begin with, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end, because I think this is a good opportunity to answer any questions anyone might have with regards to their portfolio and evidence. So I'll just give kind of a brief overview, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers afterwards. So we'll begin with a personal introduction of who I am. We'll talk briefly about the UK surgical training pathway, and then we'll discuss the 2024 self-assessment, which is also the CST portfolio. So by ways of introduction, my name's Leo. I came in the top decile of core surgical training applicants this year or last year. I have a number of publications, presentations and prizes from hard work during medical school and foundation training. I'm currently occupying a cardiothoracics themed core surgical training post at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, which I'm enjoying at the moment. I scored 96% on my surgical portfolio last year, and my interview score was 127 out of 44. We talk more about the surgical interview at a subsequent webinar, but this one we're going to talk just about the portfolio. Okay, so a brief overview of the UK surgical training pathway in case we have any international listeners. It begins with, at least in the UK, foundation training, so F1, F2. You then move on to core surgical training. This is the kind of traditional surgical training pathway, with some people going via the SFP, or so-called specialized foundation program, which is a sort of academic equivalent of the foundation training program. The core surgical training program is a 2-year surgical training course, which I'm in my first year of. You then move on to registrar training, which is ST3 to 5, so typically a 5-year program, with a kind of option being to take a year out in between core training or indeed foundation training before entering registrar training. There's also a parallel academic program called the Academic Clinical Fellowship, which kind of follows parallel to registrar training, which is kind of designed for people who want to do PhDs and so on. After registrar training, some people do a fellowship, which is where they spend a specialty year doing something very specific before completing their training and becoming a consultant. So this is kind of a brief overview of the surgical training pathway, and you can Google kind of each of the individual constituent parts. So as a bit of background to the core surgical training CST pathway, this is the most kind of traditional route that people go in to become a consultant surgeon. Year on year, it varies, but there's roughly 3,000 applicants to 600 places. So it's very competitive. Last year, the competition ratio was approximately 4.2 to 1. The MSRA, which is the multi-specialty recruitment assessment, contributes 10% of your overall ranking. We'll talk about that in due course, with the remainder 90% being composed of the portfolio or the self-assessment, which is what we're talking about now, which is 30%, and the interview, which will, as I said, be the topic of a later webinar, being the remaining 60%. So this is the kind of this year's Bible, as it were, or at least I treated it as my Bible when I was in medical school and foundation training. It's the 2024 Core Surgical Training Self-Assessment. Now, this is a really important document because it's the only way really to guarantee points. So in the interview, you could have a really good day and get a good score. You could have a bad day and get a poor score. With the self-assessment, which is the portfolio, I'll use the two interchangeably. This is the way you can kind of guarantee points. You know, if you have a publication, you evidence it correctly and you submit it, that is 10 points in the bag. So this is something that's really important to get right, because if you get it right, you maximize guaranteed points. But if you get it wrong and you don't submit the correct evidence, or you kind of don't submit the right things in the right places, then you lose easy marks. So it's really something to take seriously. So what we'll do is we'll kind of go through each sort of section, talk about how to get maximum points, and then we'll talk about like any questions and answers or common pearls and pitfalls at the end. So the first part of the 2024 core surgical training portfolio is operative experience, and this is all relatively self-explanatory. If you're involved in 40 or more cases, you get 8 points. Pretty easy. Something people sometimes ask is what counts as involvement, and the answer to that is you don't have to necessarily be performing the operation yourself, but if you're assisting, then that counts as involvement. With regards to verified logbook evidence and how to evidence this is all done through eLogbook. eLogbook is free. It's a electronic logging website. It's free to make an account. So if you're a medical student, if you're a foundation doctor, whatever stage you are, you really should create an account on eLogbook and log all your operations. All you need is the patient's hospital ID and their date of birth, and then it's very straightforward to input the operation, input your level of involvement, and just log it, and it's all done really nicely. So it's pretty straightforward. If you do 40 or more operations on eLogbook, that's 8 points. Simple. Something that can be quite tricky, or sometimes people lose marks, is by incorrectly evidencing their logbook. This year, they've been pretty kind on the self-assessment, and they give you really detailed evidence and with examples of how to evidence this. So I'm not going to waste everyone's time by explaining now. Essentially, if you go to the portfolio self-assessment document, which is found on Oriel and which can be found on the MedSet website, it gives you really clear examples of how to evidence it correctly. Essentially, you need a clinical supervisor's full name, GMC number, and signature and date on every page. And then that's your evidence, easy peasy. And as I said, there's examples online, so really straightforward, really nice of them, because traditionally they haven't, or at least historically, they haven't done this, and people have lost easy marks just from misunderstanding how to correctly evidence their operative logs. So yeah, check that out. Next is conferences. So pretty straightforward. I have attended 3 surgical conferences. If you've attended 3 conferences, you've got 3 points, easy peasy. How to find conferences. So the ASIT website, they have conferences on an annual basis, and they also have kind of sub-conferences all on their website. So with regards to finding conferences, looking at the ASIT website is pretty easy. You can also look at the Royal Society of Medicine. They index and host a large number of conferences. That's really good. And then if anyone's feeling particularly kind of desperate, the Future Surgery conference show, whatever, is on currently. It's a 2-day conference. The second day of the conference is tomorrow. It's free for healthcare professionals. So if you're at a loss and you haven't yet attended 3 surgical conferences and you're not working tomorrow, consider coming down to the Excel Center, where I'm presenting at 11 o'clock actually. So, come and say hi. But yeah, if you're really desperate, come down to the Excel Center tomorrow. It's free. It's a conference, so you get an extra point if you haven't yet been to 3 conferences. So sort of hot tip there. The next section of the self-assessment is quality improvement and clinical audit. Very briefly, a quality improvement project is improving an aspect of clinical care or clinical process. It traditionally follows a PDSA cycle or a plan, do, study, act. This contrasts with an audit, which is where you take an element of clinical practice and compare it to a guideline or gold standard, seek to improve it and then remeasure it. That's the difference between quality improvement and clinical audit in a nutshell. And here's how to score top marks in this category. So you score 8 points if you were the lead in all aspects of a surgically themed clinical audit or QI project, which has demonstrated change. So the key parts of this is you need to be the lead, and it needs to be surgically themed and has to be all parts. So it's not enough to just do one cycle or to do one data collection. You need to lead the sort of audit or quality improvement question. You need to measure care, you need to improve care, and you need to remeasure care, and that kind of package together would score you 8 points. So that's that really. This can be quite labor intensive, and it can be quite difficult to get this done in a timely manner. So my tip would essentially be collaborate with colleagues with this one. There's no reason why you can't have 3 or 4 people all co-leads on an audit or QIP. So I think a really good strategy is get together with a few colleagues, come up with an audit or QIP, and just share the burden, the workload, share the data collection, share the implementation, share the subsequent data collection, and then everybody wins. So I think that's a good way to score maximum points in this area. Depending on the specialty you want to do or the specialty you're in, it's easy to find audit or QIP topic areas, just have a look at the specialty website. They often have an audit or QIP section, and your registrar and consultant colleagues are also a really good repository of information on this. They'll often have audits or QIPs that they want to get done in their departments. So to summarize, collaborating with colleagues and asking your consultant registrars, that's a really good kind of way and method of getting a good QIP or audit done. Next we have so yeah, this is further down in clinical audit. I attached the slide for how to get maximum points, but if you're sorry, just admitting someone, if time's getting tight and you aren't able to score maximum points, here are how to score at least some points. So if for 2 points it says I was involved in a clinical audit or QI project, just doing a data collection, that would score you 2 points. So if time's really running tight and you haven't got an audit or QIP under your belt, just collect some data for one that's currently going on in your department. Ask other SHOs, ask your regis, ask your consultants, because scoring at least 2 points is relatively achievable. So there's no excuse really for scoring fewer than 2 points in this category. Okay. Now, it's kind of subsequent to the audit category, it's not enough just to do an audit. You can score additional points by presenting that audit project at a conference for 5 points. So if you, with regards to this, obviously time's getting tight for this year, but if you're not applying this year or applying next year, the Association of Surgeons in Training, or ASIT, are a really good trainee-led organization where you can present projects. Anecdotally, there's quite a low threshold to present your audits or quality improvement projects at ASIT conferences. They have conferences, a number of conferences during the year. Their annual conference is in March next year in Bournemouth, and I think abstract submissions are open currently. So if you're applying next year as opposed to this year, so you've got a little bit more time on your hands, I would strongly recommend submitting your audit or QIP to the ASIT 2024 conference, because anecdotally there's quite a good chance that it'll be accepted, at least for a poster. So you get to score an additional 5 points on that. So yeah, that would be my advice. With regards to evidencing your QIPs and audits, a really good way to get this evidenced and get all the I's dotted and the T's crossed would be to draft a letter for your supervisor to sign. When I was applying, when I needed things evidenced, what I would do is I'd draft a letter saying, "Dear to whoever it may concern, for the purposes of Dr. Gundle's core surgical training application, I can confirm as his clinical supervisor, he undertook XYZ project in XYZ department between these dates and found this, blah, 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 blah," signed their name. I wrote that all out, and then I emailed it to my supervisor and said, "Dear Doctor, dear Mr. Such and Such, for the purpose of my application, I've drafted this letter. I'd be grateful if you could sign it or amend any of the wording if you're not happy, or let me know and I can redraft it." I did this a number of times to a number of supervisors, and every single time they just signed the letter and sent it back to me. Easy peasy. So I would say make it therefore as easy as possible for your supervisor to give you the evidence that you need. So when you've done an audit, when you've done a QI project and you need the evidence, just draft a letter with all the buzzwords that you need, email it courteously to your supervisor and say, if you're happy, please consider signing this letter and sending it back to me. And anecdotally, that works really well, and I got everything done, when I needed it done. So I really recommend. All right, where are we? So presentations and publications. So this is potentially the most difficult and the most labor-intensive part of the portfolio to accomplish. I would say if you're applying this round and you don't have a publication yet, it would be pretty ambitious to expect getting a publication done now ahead of the 2024 application cycle. That being said, there are probably some people on the call who are applying next year or may take another year to apply, so that might be relevant to you. So in summary, if you win a prize for an oral presentation, that's 10 points. And if you have a first author PubMed publication, that's 10 points. It's important to know that they're not additive. So you either score 10 points for one or 10 points for the other. You don't score 20 points for having both. So it's pretty self-explanatory, really. The key points basically here would be an oral presentation, winning a prize for it at an international or national conference, or being first author of a PubMed cited publication. It's not enough to have it published in some esoteric kind of regional local newsletter. It has to be an peer-reviewed journal that's indexed on PubMed, and you have, the PubMed ID. So there's some mistakes. My tips for this would be to get started with projects early. Publications and prizes and presentations, they're really labor intensive. They're so much more time consuming than one might expect. So get started early. ask registrars consultants to get involved with their project. Anecdotally, whenever I've asked a senior colleague to get involved with a project that they're currently working on, people are really receptive to it. They're really friendly. They're really inclusive and collaborative. So I'd say it's never a bad shout to say to a senior colleague, a reg or a consultant, I'm really interested in XYZ. Do you have any projects or papers going that I can get involved with? And I think generally that works really well. And my final point would be tenacious. Often senior colleagues are busy, they've got a lot going on, they might have families and so on, and therefore publication isn't their priority. So you do have to be tenacious, don't let things slip through your fingers, just work hard, and don't give up, essentially, is the tip I'd give. So yeah, with regards to publications, get started early and keep at it, basically. When it comes to presentations and prizes, this kind of slide encapsulates how you can find these sorts of opportunities. I've found a lot of opportunities through social media, as distasteful and as unfun as I generally find social media. Having a professional or like a sort of surgical Instagram and Twitter, or I guess this is out of date now, an X account, is really useful for finding conference opportunities. Similarly, the Royal Society of Medicine, they have quite a large index, a large repository of meetings and conferences, quite impressively so, actually. So I'd check them out. And then the Royal College of Surgeons and ASIT, as I've mentioned previously, they have a lot of typically have a lot of conferences and meetings that go on. So I'd say follow a bunch of surgical societies on Instagram and Twitter. Sign up to the mailing lists for the Royal Society of Medicine and the College of Surgeons and ASIT, and check their websites periodically. And these are good ways to find conferences and meetings, and good opportunities to find ways to present your research. A sort of tip with regards to this would be that especially on sort of Twitter and Instagram, I found smaller, more like esoteric meetings, which I've submitted abstracts for, and anecdotally, these are more likely to yield an oral presentation as opposed to just a poster at some of these sort of larger, more prestigious meetings. So yeah, going small, going a bit more esoteric or niche can yield really good results. So making the most of these platforms, I'd recommend. Cool. So the next part of the portfolio is teaching. So it's fairly self-explanatory. The top prize, or I guess the most number of points, is to lead a teaching program where you have employed or delegated the teaching responsibilities or engaged with local tutors to help deliver a teaching program to healthcare professionals or medical students at the regional level. Now, this has changed since last year. Last year, you were able to score maximum points if it was delivered virtually. This year, you get 8 points for a virtual teaching program, but you get 10 points, maximum points, for an in-person program. So the way to do this essentially is be in charge, work with colleagues, and come up with a teaching program, so a series of 4 or more sessions, as stipulated here, to deliver something to do with surgery across a region which is defined as more than one hospital trust. So let's talk about how we can do that. So basically, the way I would see this doing is, I did this during medical school, which I think is a really kind of good way of doing that. So if there are any medical students on the webinar at the moment, I think doing this in medical school is a good way, because it's easier to capture a region whilst at medical school by delivering a teaching program or a teaching curriculum across 2 or more different hospitals that are kind of affiliated with your medical school. If you're a foundation doctor or a trainee, the way I would do this is collaborate with colleagues at nearby hospital trusts. And to give an example that that my colleagues did, is my colleagues were interested in ENT. So what they did is they developed an ENT teaching program where they gave a few lectures on ENT emergencies, and then ENT kind of emergencies and ENT practical skills. So for example, nasal packing and oral and nasal examination. And then they had a ENT examination session where they did like a Rinius and Weber's test and flexible nasal endoscopy, those sorts of things. You can imagine there's quite a large curriculum, or quite a large body of content there, which is quite easy and quite nice to break up across 4 or more sessions. And if you deliver those sessions across 2 or more hospitals to medical students or foundation doctors, or other doctors interested in ENT, then that's maximum points. So in summary, it has to be across ideally delivered in person, although you can do it virtually for nearly full marks, 8 instead of 10 points. I'm doing it across 2 different hospital trusts. It's important to note they can't be affiliated trusts. So by which I mean, so I work at St Thomas's Hospital, just down the river is Guy's Hospital. If I delivered a teaching program at St Thomas's and Guy's, that wouldn't count, because they're part of the same recognized institution and they have shared services across those trusts. But I'd have to deliver the program at a different hospital, for example, St Mary's Hospital or the Royal Free or something like that, and that would count. So yeah, it has to be 4 or more sessions across different hospital trusts. And collaborating with colleagues is a really useful way to do that. I'm happy to take any questions about that at the end. Cool. So the next section of the portfolio is training and teaching. So this has changed marginally from last year. Last year, you got maximum marks for having a master's in teaching, but now you get full marks for having a PG cert. A PG cert is a qualification that, generally speaking, takes approximately a year to complete and is delivered by universities. And it's a teaching qualification, which involves typically some assessed sessions and some essays on the methodology behind teaching, and teaching theories and teaching practice, etc. That's quite labor intensive and it can be quite expensive. So not many people will have 5 points in this area. If you are interested and have some time on your hands and fancy doing a PG cert, I would say the UCAS website, if we draw our minds back to when we were even applying to university, the UCAS website has a good like repository or index of different PG certs in medical education delivered by different universities. Some do them completely remotely, which is quite good and useful, and some do them on a kind of flexible basis. So that's one way to accomplish a PG cert in this category. And then to receive, but as it's important to say, most people won't have this. But you can also achieve up to 3 points by having substantial training in teaching. So for example, a 2-day course. And then the final, you get 1 mark for having some training in teaching, for example, as part of medical school or as part of your foundation training. With regards to this, the MedSet does offer a Train the Trainers course, and this can be taken in the comfort of your own home, delivered virtually. So if you are interested and you want to lock down some points in the training and teaching methodology section, MedSet does offer a course to accomplish this. If you follow the links there or the QR code, this will score you by completing this course as run through MedSet. It's accredited. You get continuing medical education points, and it's equivalent to 3 points on the core surgical training portfolio. So this is something to consider if you are looking to lock in points in the training and teaching area, and you can scan the QR code and follow the links here to get some points in that area. Cool. So that kind of concludes all the main domains. The next thing I'll say is how to evidence your portfolio. So anecdotally, I had some colleagues who had great portfolios, had done all the things they needed to do, but had their points slashed because they hadn't submitted the correct evidence. For example, not including consultant GMC numbers on letters, or not having the correct signatures, or not having a date and things like that. So I'd say, as much as it takes time to actually do the achievements, submitting the correct evidence, I'd say, is as important. It's all stipulated in the core surgical training self-assessment. It's all there. So there shouldn't be any surprises. My tips basically would therefore be read the small print +++. So, go through everything with a fine-toothed comb, make sure you're not missing any important details, and make sure you're submitting the right evidence. Draft letters for your consultants to sign, as I mentioned previously. Just kind of draft out all the buzzwords and just send it to your consultant, and courteously ask them to, if they're happy, sign it, or if not, let you know, or redraft it, whatever they like. And then the final point I'd say, which is surprising to some people but works really well, is feel free to annotate your portfolio and submit it. So the way it works on Oriel is you compile your evidence in PDFs and you submit them. What I did is I used a PDF compiler. I'm not sponsored or paid by DocHub. I just use DocHub. It's not very expensive. In fact, there's a free trial and I really recommend it. What I did is I annotated my PDFs just to make it super simple for the person marking my PDFs just to give me the marks. For example, I drew like orange boxes around like the key buzzwords on letters. On the contents page, I added my own contents page with page numbers on my portfolio, what the evidence I was submitting was, and like what the number of points I had self-assessed as earning. I basically made it super easy, super clear. So the examiner, when they're going through my PDFs, because they're going to be going through, hundreds potentially, to see this person has submitted this evidence, it's really clear, like in orange box, here's where the evidence, like the key buzzword is, and here's what page I can find everything on, and here's how many points it's earned, like bang, bang, bang. So there's no reason why you can't annotate your PDFs, make it really clear, use like underline things, highlight things, draw arrows, whatever you like. That's all fair game, as long as it's all truthful and not adding things. And as I said, I use DocHub, and I found this a really useful way to compile my PDFs and annotate them in a way that makes it easier for the examiner to mark. Cool. So let me go back. So if you would like, you're more than welcome to scan this QR code, and I can provide my personal portfolio for you to review so you can see how I compiled it and how I did things. So feel free to do that. I'll leave it up just for a couple more seconds if you want to fish out your phone and scan the QR code. And yeah, I'll be more than happy to share the PDFs which I submitted, just so you can see how I did things. And because I lost 0 points on my portfolio for inaccurate evidencing, and I marked mine up with, as I said, boxes and underlines and arrows and things, so you can see how I did it. So feel free to do that. And I'll move on to the next slide. So scan it if you still have time. And then the next steps essentially is, this was kind of the part 1 of our webinar series. It's obviously core surgical training season. Myself and the team have put together a kind of really comprehensive core surgical training guide on the website. It can be found on the MedSet website, medset.co.uk. It has everything you need, from tips from the portfolio, like as I've discussed now, as well as your leadership speech and the interview and the MSRA and all this kind of stuff. It's really, really comprehensive. So I'd really recommend checking that out. And for the people on the webinar, viewing the webinar, we've also put together a discount code for 15% off. So do make the most of that. As I said, 15% off the core surgical training course online, which is designed to be as comprehensive as possible and should hopefully take you through everything. And then also the Train the Trainers course, which is equivalent to 3 points on the CST portfolio, which is really, really valuable because every point counts when you've got such a competitive and kind of evenly matched playing field. So that's the kind of plug for the website and the Train the Trainers course. So thank you very much. This QR code takes you to the CST series sign up if you haven't already, so you don't miss our subsequent webinars, which will be on the interview, which is obviously a really big part of the core surgical training. The core surgical training application. It's quite complicated. There are ways that you can gain marks, there are ways which are marks are easily lost. So do sign up if you haven't already to catch the next installment of the webinar, where we talk about the interview more precisely. So I'll leave it at that. If you have any questions, do feel free to, well, I'll hand back to Francis to kind of field questions. You can, I guess, write in the box or put a hand up to ask. But yeah, please let me know, and thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Francis, you're still on mute.
Thought I'd just click that. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much, Leo. That was really, really comprehensive, and it's really great to hear. There are some questions coming in. So what I thought we could do is that I will read out some of the questions, and then hopefully you can answer them, or we can answer them together. Just something to note from previously. So with the Train the Trainers course, and with what Leo was covering in terms of points for teaching, there is a Train the Trainers course that we offer, which is online only, and doesn't have a face-to-face component, and that would only score you 1 point. But there is one that offers a virtual classroom, and which covers the face-to-face component, and that would score you 3 points. So if you are interested, just make sure you select the right one, and which is highlighted on the website. So now for some questions. So first we have a question from Yesh, and it actually pertains to Train the Trainers. So would the Train the Trainers course be worth 1 or 3 points for teaching qualifications? So hopefully I have answered that just now, just in time. So the online only course would count for 1 point, and the course that includes the virtual classroom would count as your face-to-face teaching. This is according to the guidance, the self-assessment guidance that they've issued this year. However, there's nothing that can be so that would be appropriate to evidence as evidence for 3 points. Hopefully that answers that question. Then a question from Priya. Unsure if anyone else has had issue with the QR code on the date form, says invalid when giving feedback.
Let me try it myself. Hold on. It works.
And if there's any other questions, please feel free to drop them in.
It's working for me. So not sure.
Could you just confirm, Priya, which QR code you're having issue with?
Maybe it was this one. Let me try this one as well.
And whilst we'll wait, the one given for feedback and portfolio access earlier.
I think it might be this one. It was working for me when I just scanned it now. What I would say potentially is, Priya, feel free to get in touch via email, and I'd happily share my portfolio.
Yes, so if you can just drop an email to hello@medset.co.uk, and then we can make sure that you can access it. And if anyone has any other questions, you can also use that email address. Another thing that I would say, I think Leo's probably been quite modest in his achievements, and so to score 96% in the portfolio is actually phenomenal. And so that's definitely his portfolio is definitely something that should be looked at and taken advantage of. And also in terms of the core surgical training interview course that Leo's developed, having looked at it and also worked in it myself, genuinely it is probably the most comprehensive resource out there, because I took some of the stuff that I'd done from general surgical ST3 interviews and also sort of merged it. So it's got that really good level of comprehensiveness in terms of answer structures and knowledge and everything. So it's something that we really do recommend. So another question is, do we know what would be classified as a good score for the portfolio? And then it's tricky to say, I know.
Yeah. So thank you for saying so, Francis. It's if this is going to sound like, well, yeah, a massive brag, but if I was applying this year, I'd actually have 100% in my portfolio. So I'm a bit bitter about that. So to answer your question, Yesh, essentially, it's difficult. It's impossible to say because it changes every year. But the thing that I would say is, if your portfolio is on the weaker side, for example, you don't have a first author publication or a prize, or you're lacking some of those really shiny things, that's not to say you can't score one of your top choice jobs. I know someone, a friend of mine, he had a portfolio on the weaker side. He didn't have any of those shiny things. He didn't have a national prize. He didn't have a first author publication, but then he went out and he smashed the interview and he got his first choice Northwest London orthopedic themed core surgical training job. So what I would say is definitely take the portfolio seriously, but that's not to say you can't get exactly what you want by taking the interview really seriously. And kind of, to bounce off Francis's point, I'd like to think that the course that we've created at MedSet would set you in really good stead to really impress the interviewers.
Absolutely, yeah. So I second all of that in terms of, portfolio is important, but you can make up the time. The other thing that I would add is there are now at the later stage of the game, if you are applying for this season, it's all about being strategic with your effort. So there are some things that you can achieve in a relatively short space of time and others no. So as Leo said, you might be able to sneak in a conference. Obviously there is one tomorrow, which is actually very helpful. You're not going to sneak in something like a publication, but what you might be able to cobble together is an audit. And there are some audits that can be done very quickly, and it's about what you choose. So if you choose something where the data is digital, where you choose and the information is binary, so it's either yes, no, or it's a very simple answer, such as a number. So it can be, and also something where you can get the information very quickly and the intervention is quite simple, then you can actually turn things around quite quickly. And I actually remember doing an audit so calcium testing, so bone profiles in patients coming into A&E with renal colic, because the guidelines state that people who come into A&E who have renal colic need to have their calcium tested as part of the guidelines, but very often that wasn't done. So you can look at all the patients who've come into A&E in the past week with renal colic, maybe look at the urology list or the tape list or something like that, find out which ones haven't been done. Your intervention can be something as simple as staff education, so you can maybe create a really quick poster or send an email around or tell everyone that's your intervention, and then monitor it the week afterwards to see if there's been a difference. So just like that, you can actually create an audit and get those extra points really, really quickly. So things like that to look at. Then there's things like courses, which are again things that you can do in the time that you have left, particularly if they're online or virtual. and also potentially teaching is something that you might be able to add some extra points to as well by creating an impromptu sort of a semi-formal teaching program, maybe for some medical students who are shadowing you or around the ward or something like that. So enough of me talking there. I will just reach out to see if there are any further questions, and if not, we shall sign off. Perfect. So I think that's probably it then. The session has been recorded, and the recording will be available to all of you, as well as other people who couldn't make it now. So that will be available on our website. But if you have any issues accessing that, again, please feel free to email us. But we hope this has been useful. We obviously wish you all the best of luck in your development, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.